Looking to roll your data over to the next model year or preparing for the next year? Well, that's the topic of this week's Planning for Profit Minute. In the software, if you remember, you've got your individual models. For example, here it's the standard business model for 2024. Now, I know some contractors simply go in and they just edit their data and keep using that same model. But there's advantages to actually rolling the data over to the next model year. And so I want to show you, first off, how to do it, and then what are some of the things that you need to look at and what are those advantages. So to make this happen, we're simply going to go into Setup in the software itself. So I'm going to go into Setup, and then I'm going to go into Company Models. So I choose those two items, and I see my model. So in this case, I've got my standard business model for several years, going back in this case all the way to 2018 through 2024. We're getting ready to roll this over to 2025, and so I want to get that model ready and just start my budgeting process and my planning process now before the end of the year so that when January 1st hits, we're ready to go. Well, that process is actually very simple. All we're going to do is simply go into the model that we're looking at, in this case the standard business model, and I'm going to hit the action dots over here on the right-hand side. So when I hit those three dots under Actions, one of the items that we have is Activate the next model year. So I'm simply going to choose that as an option, and it's going to pop up and ask me, are you sure? Do you want to roll 2024 into 2025? I simply say yes. Now, as I do that, what it's doing is creating a complete copy of 2024, and it's updating my data for 2025. Now, again, you can still see in this case, 2024 is my active model, but we now have 2025 out there as well. So I'm going to switch over and make 2025 my active model. So that way, again, I can look at that particular data. So now up at the top here, I can see I'm now looking at the standard business model for 2025. Rolling the data over does a couple of things for you. When I go into costs input, first thing that it's going to do is under equipment, if you remember each truck, each item that you put in here, you said that you were going to, that in a certain number of years, you're going to have to replace that piece of equipment, right? So in my particular case here, as we look at this, I can see that we have this 2022 Sprinter van. I'm sorry, vehicle 22. It's a 2019 Sprinter van. It was going to cost me $20,000 to replace it, to find another good used model, and we're going to put money away for 2 years in 2023 and 2024. That's an annual amount of $10,000. Now, by rolling the company over, the data over to the new model, what it will do is it will start to track those items, and those that should now be complete, it'll no longer put those dollars aside, because again, we're making the assumption that you've been using the tool and you've been putting money aside for each of those vehicles. So when this one does die, you have the ability to go ahead and replace it. And so that's what the tool is doing for you, and it's going to start to basically give you the ability to start to track that, right? So I can see we're in 2025. Again, any of these vehicles that are pre-25 in their end date, that's a vehicle that we need to review. Number one, is it still in the fleet, or do we need to delete it from this list? Number two, if it's a vehicle that we have put 100% of the money that we need aside for it, we could pull that one out of here, right? So let's say I've got this vehicle here that we put money aside for 5 years, 2018 through 2022. We have the money there. I could now shut that vehicle off. It's saying, are you sure you want to deselect this piece of equipment? Yes, I do. At that point, what it's doing is it's deselecting it. It's leaving the piece of equipment on your list. But if you notice, the dollars per year that it's building into your pricing just went to zero. And so at that point, it lowers your overhead costs for the company because we no longer need to put those dollars aside for the company. That's the first thing. Second thing, you're going to want to go back in and just double check your wages that you're paying to each of your employees, and do you need to update any of that? And then last, I'm going to go back in and I'm going to update really my materials and my overhead expenses to basically make sure that this stuff is accurate as we're planning and putting together the next year. Go in at that point, check your variable overhead rate. Are there any of these that you need to update and change? And then last, what about your debt category? Are there some of these loans that you've now paid off that we can get rid of, or are there other loans that we need to add in that we didn't have in the previous model? So again, we want to look at those couple of items. Once we do that, the model is out there and you are ready to go from this point forward. Roll your data over. Give yourself a couple of months to plan the next year to get yourself in place so I know that my pricing at the beginning of the year is ready to go and my model's in place. Use the tool, increase your profitability. And that is this week's Planning for Profit Minute.